We now welcome onto AV Plus Ed Gibbons of Almo. Ed, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you. Great to meet you, Jonathan.
It's great to have you on. I just saw the news of Almo's new Wisconsin warehouse and the solar panels that were put in there. I wanted to ask you a little bit about it. How difficult was it to convert such a large facility from traditional power to solar energy?
It's actually surprisingly easy. The actual setups are great. There's a number of companies out there that do most of the work for you. It's just a question of whether you can make the economics work, and that normally has to do with what the payback period is and whether you own the building or whether you lease the building and how long your lease is, et cetera. But the actual installation probably took 3 or 4 months in total. Some of those delays, a time period in there is due to inspections and cutovers and making sure all the equipment's working right. But it's a pretty straightforward process.
Yeah, I want to talk about that return quickly. Obviously, there are environmental benefits to solar energy, but there's also an ROI in terms of dollar and cents over a certain amount of time. What would you say to other companies that are considering the switch to solar, but are worried about that initial investment?
Sure. I would first see if you own the building or not. Second would be is how recent the roof has been replaced, how new that roof is. You want to at least have 7, 8 years left on the roof if you're going to do an installation. So otherwise, you've got to move it, and there's some expenses associated with that. If you're leasing, you want to know that you have enough time in your lease to get the payback period. Whereas if you own it, if you're expecting it to be 5 years, it turns out to be 6 years, not that big of an issue. But if you're leasing it for 4 years and it turns out to be 6 years, someone else may be getting those benefits if you don't renew that lease.
You mentioned a moment ago that there are plenty of companies out there that'll kind of handle the legwork, but how do you go about choosing the right company to partner with, especially considering that this is a relatively new technology sector? So there may not be as much of a history of success with some of these companies as there would be with, say, an integrator or an architecture firm or so on and so forth.
Yeah, that's definitely true. It's also regionally based as well. That's why we used different suppliers in PA and in Wisconsin. Some of them are, because their installation crews are a local or geographically based crew. But there's also different regulations and different incentives by states. So they need to know the details because it can get pretty expensive if you make a mistake. Making an assumption you're going to get a certain amount of rebate, and it turns out not to be there. So that's why we used a couple different players. We also put it out to bid, at least 3 or 4 players to come to the party with plans. They'll use different panels, different technologies, and we've done 2 or 3 of them. We can sort of understand the language and know what we're looking for as we go forward with those projects.
Yeah, and I'll ask you about that, but I do know that Almo has done, I think this is the 3rd facility that Almo has converted to solar power. Just last year, we wrote about the Philadelphia headquarters. But obviously, as you mentioned, it gets a little bit easier each time, but a company that's doing this for the first time, what's that time frame like from, okay, we've decided that we want to convert to solar power to, okay, now we can put out a press release letting people know that that the conversion has been successful?
Yeah, my guess would be if you were super aggressive on it, it might be 6 or 7 months, but that's pretty aggressive. I'd say it'd take about a year, to understand the technology, get the bids together. Weather plays a factor, at least in the northern states. So yeah, I would say plan on a year before you turn it up. And then, there's inspections, and like we had to change out a transformer, part of a transformer, so some unexpected costs. They weren't that great, but they always add time and in getting those inspections done, et cetera. So plan on a year.
Do you guys consider any sort of LEED certifications or tax incentives or anything like that while this is going on? And how do you navigate those decisions? Or is the return on investment internally and obviously the environmental impact from this enough?
Yeah, so LEED certification is a step well above that. And I think a lot of that pertains to when you're looking at new construction, although, or a major reconstruction of a building. So we didn't have those opportunities here. But I think the, sort of the environmental stewardship is a big part of it. And then, if we can make the economic, we're a privately held company. So We have a little bit more of a lead time on payback than maybe a publicly traded company would. But it's still, there are things that a company needs to spend money on, and if this one can have a payback, that certainly makes it an easier decision.
Absolutely. And as I mentioned, this is the third facility that Almo has converted. Are you guys planning on more conversions, and what are your plans moving forward when it comes to clean energy?
Sure. The plan is, so there's probably two major initiatives, three major initiatives that we're working on. Well, one is the solar, and we've got 4 other locations we will be looking to this for. I can't say that we'll absolutely do it, but we'll certainly be looking to do it. But it has to do with when those leases expire, and several of them expire in 2022 and 2023. That's really the time to be able to do it, because we may move to another building, or we want to make sure we've got enough term in the lease to make the payback possible. So those are exciting initiatives. So we're excited that we've got the third one done, and then over the course of the next 2 years, we've got the opportunity for at least 2 or 3 more. The other one is we've been changing out. About 5, 6, 7 years ago, we changed a lot of our warehouse lighting to motion control lighting, so that cuts the power by more than half that's used for lighting. And now we're switching those to LED lights as we go through, and it cuts it by another 25, 30%. So those are significant savings in an operation that typically runs 16 to 20 hours a day. And the third one is we're looking to electrify our forklift fleet. It's probably about 80% propane today, and over the course of the next 3 or 4 years, we expect that to shift to 80% electric. And that goes well with the solar initiative too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, maybe we'll be able to have you on once that conversion is done, and you can tell us a little bit about the intricacies of making that switch to electric vehicles as well. Ed Gibbons of Almo, thank you so much for joining us and telling us a little bit about this project.
Absolutely. Glad to do it.
Many thanks to Ed Gibbons for joining us and telling us all about the solar panel project that Almo is undergoing.